In example 2.2.2, we need to take our frequency distribution from the previous example and create a bar graph from it. So we'll start out pretty simple. I'll first do it by hand and then show you how to do it in Excel and Google Sheets. They are very similar, both of them, to create bar graphs. We need to create an x-axis and a y-axis. Our x-axis is going to have what the data was. So here we have types of cars, and we can just list them out on the side. And for a bar graph, the idea is the heights of the bars indicate the frequencies of the data values. I have a lot of multiples of 5. I need to decide a scale for my y-axis. For now, I'm going to put the word frequency along the side so that I know that's the representation of the y-axis. Our highest value given here is 12, so let's go up by 2s. What's important about doing this by hand is that you try to get these spaces, between the y-axes to be pretty consistent. The great thing about technology is that technology does this for you and you don't have to worry about it. But since we're trying it by hand, just know that your y-axis, the increments need to be equally spaced. Let's draw some bars. Ford has a frequency of 5, so I'm going to go up to halfway between 4 and 6 and draw a rectangle. Chevy goes up to 12, and it's really the preference of the graph creator whether you want these bars touching or not. In this case, I'm not going to have them touch because I have very specific categories that I'm putting things in. So personally for me, I don't think they should touch. You may see some books and some graphs online where they do, just to let you know. But because they are distinct and different, they shouldn't touch. We're going to see a little bit later when we're working with numbers along this x-axis that they may touch or they will touch. So let's keep going. Honda, 6. And so notice I'm drawing the height of my bar. Toyota is 12. And then I'm just dropping it down to that x-axis. Nissan was 10. Remember, you want to be precise. Okay, we are doing mathematics. We should be fairly precise. And it should be clear from the graph what cars are represented the most, Chevy and Toyota, and which cars are represented the least, Ford, and the other category. We already know the other consists of 5 different types of cars, so they would be represented the least. And there you have it, a bar graph by hand. Let's give our graph a title. Types of cars driven by college students. So we have a title, we have a y-axis and a y-axis label. We have an x-axis and an x-axis label. And there you have a bar graph. Now let's take a moment and create this same bar graph, but in Google Sheets. So here I am in my Google Drive. You can get to it by logging in. If you're in Chrome, the Google apps are up here. You can see Drive. When you're in Drive, you want to click a new Google Sheet to bring it up. And here we have an untitled spreadsheet. In order to rename our spreadsheet, once it gets loaded, you can name it whatever you would like. And then we're going to take that frequency distribution that we created in 2.2.1 and input it here. Here's another point where you can pause and input the data on your own and then resume to see the rest of the instructions for creating the graph itself. But I am going to cut out the part where I'm inputting all of this data for the sake of time and because you have that pause button. Okay, now that I have the data in, I'm going to show you a useful function in Google Sheets. Notice I didn't put the total down here. I don't want to actually hard type that total. I want Google to add these numbers up for me. And the great thing about Google and about Excel is that they are both fairly powerful calculators, especially when it comes to big data. One thing that is kind of cool, even right now, is I just hit the equal sign in the B8 cell, and it's giving me a suggestion. Sum B2 to B7. Well, what that means is it's going to add the numbers starting at B2, which is where that 5 is, all the way down to the other, which is where the other 5 is. So Google is pretty smart in that it thinks, I want to add these numbers, and I do. It says to press enter to select suggestions, so I'm going to push enter. Notice that it highlights the area that it's adding, and sum means to add. So we have all our values. If I hit enter one more time, it will actually put the calculation in that cell. Notice when I'm on the cell, I still see the formula up here on top. That's what I counted. And there's the actual sum. Let's suppose on a whim I made a mistake. And Ford isn't supposed to be 5, but Ford was supposed to be 15. Now if I changed that and I hit enter, you'll see the total number changed too. So the great thing about having formulas inside of these spreadsheets is that if you make a mistake, you do not have to recount and hard type the answer in. It automatically will fix it for you. So let's change that Ford back to 5 so that we have the frequency distribution from the previous problem. And now I want to create a bar chart. So with this data, I'm going to highlight it, and I'm not going to highlight the total. I'm just going to highlight up through other. And come up here on top and click insert. All the way down, notice there's a chart selection. So let's click that. Pie chart's actually 2.2.3, so we're going to keep this up here. We need to create a pie chart. We created a pie chart. Let's keep it. Some things to notice, that the values for the frequency distributions really correspond to percentages. So I'm going to calculate this really fast now that I have my pie chart up here. To find a frequency, to find the percentage or the relative frequency, we take the number of the frequency and we divide by the total. I'm going to get Google to do these calculations for me. So I'm going to have an equal sign. Anytime I want the program to calculate for me, I'm going to hit equals. I want it to take the number 5 from this cell. So I'm not going to type the number 5 in. I'm going to click on the cell. This tells Google, go look at that cell and find the value. And I'm going to divide by the total. So I'm going to click on the total. And you can see right up here, 0.1 or 10%. It is already calculating and giving me what the expected answer is. That is one nice thing about Google. Hit enter, and there's a relative frequency. I could try to drag this down, and when I drag it down, it's supposed to make copies of whatever's up top. It does not make a copy like a perfect copy, an identical copy. It makes a copy and it shifts if there are cell references in there. So remember when we created this formula and we put the cell values in there instead of the actual values? These are called references. I'm referencing cell B2 and I'm referencing cell B8. We did a little bit about this in the first lab. So now, if I try to drag down, instead of being cell B2, the new formula will have B3 in it. Because I've dragged that formula down one cell, it's going to change the cell references. But there's a tiny little problem. Notice in this formula, we've got B2 divided by B8. In this formula, we've got B3 divided by B9. Oh no, that's not what I wanted. Let's fix it. I'm going to have to change it. I want it to be B8. Oh, and there I have another value that matches for Chevy. Sure enough, Chevy's 24%. I could try it again, but every single time I pull down on this handle, this little square in the corner that changes my mouse from a pointer to a plus sign. This little square is called a handle. And I drag and it copies. But like I said, there's a problem with the copy. In order to fix that problem, to force it to always take the cell with 50 in it, I'm going to lock that cell. I call it locking the cell. And what I mean by locking is I'm going to put dollar signs around the letter. So a $B, $8, and Excel's still going to read that cell. See, we still have 24%. But now when I drag down, watch what happens. If I click on this cell, check it out. B4 divided by B8. B5 divided by B8. So the B8 stays. It's locked. And we can do it one more time. Sure enough, B8 divided by B8 is going to give me 1 or 100%. Play around with this. If you mess up something, you can't break the program. Just go back, delete, and try again. Okay? In my past moments of teaching with statistics and Excel and Google, students can be very apprehensive about working in this program. One thing to notice, all these tools up top are pretty much mostly what you have in a document application like Google Docs or Word, Microsoft Word. A lot of the things are the same, but there are some things that are different. And the fact that we have the ability to calculate inside a spreadsheet and we can organize our data, we have some more formulas that we have access to that we'll learn about a little later. But this wasn't even the chart we were supposed to create. Oh no, let's scoot him over. Let's scoot it over. We're going to grab our frequency table. I'm going to leave the relative frequency off. Go back to Insert and Chart, and it creates another pie chart. I don't want a pie chart, so how do I change that? Let's come up here to Chart Type, drop down menu, and we've got some bars. There's the bar. I want a column chart. Notice we've got choices of lines, columns, bars, columns and bars. In the textbook, we lump those two together into a bar chart. Know that columns are vertical and bars are horizontal in Google. Pie charts, scatters, maps, other types of charts that we could possibly have. We may see some of those a little bit later. But let's do a column chart. And you notice, hopefully you notice, that we have a graph very similar to the one we did by hand. So here's the one we did by hand. Here's a much nicer, neater one done inside of Google.